Hello and welcome to Autistic FM. My name is Haje. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm your host on this journey. You can subscribe to Autistic FM wherever you get your podcasts. And seriously, please do. Subscribing is one of the most supportive things you can do, whether it's in your podcasting app, on YouTube, or, well, wherever you subscribe to stuff. You can find full transcripts and additional information about each episode on autistic.fm. In this episode of the podcast, I'm joined by Dylan King, a creative powerhouse from Houston, Texas. Dylan is a seasoned writer who has turned to life coaching with a focus on helping others harness the power of creative writing to explore and express their neurodivergence experiences. Our conversation covers the potential of writing as a therapeutic tool, the concept of the thrash, which is like an internal struggle with words, and the importance of finding peace and understanding through written expression. As usual, a quick trigger warning. The episode does include discussions about neurodivergent burnout, the pressures that accompany high masking, and the specifics of being a neurodivergent woman. There's nothing particularly graphic in this episode, but please do take care of yourself while listening. As somebody who's really passionate about words and about writing, I can't wait to share this episode with you. So that's enough of my waffling. Let's roll tape. Dear guest, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Would you start by sharing your name and pronouns with me, please?
Yes, my name is Dylan King, she, her, and I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Where in the world are you?
I am in Houston, Texas.
Awesome. Let's just get straight into this. How and when did you realize you might be neurodivergent?
Yeah, so I have two young girls, 7 and 5. My 7-year-old was diagnosed really early on. She's non-speaking, and so we got her diagnosis when she was only 2. And pretty early on in her diagnosis, I really wanted to look at adults who,
Mm-hmm.
what their experiences were like, because, hopefully one day she will grow into a happy, well-adjusted adult, whatever her experience looks like. Whether that means she continues to live with us or she has a job or does communicate or doesn't really communicate as much, whatever her experience looks like, I wanted to hear from adults instead of a bunch of autism moms. I wanted to see what their experiences were looking like. So those were the types of resources that I began to search out. And when my 5-year-old started school, we started to get feedback from her teachers and her pediatrician saying, I think you probably need to have her evaluated also.
Mm-hmm.
Um, while her presentation is different, it's there. And my partner and I are so adamant that we want to support our children in whatever they want to do, however they want to express themselves, whatever they want to become. And so we were so adamant, hey, whatever she needs to be successful in school, to become all the beautiful things that she wants to be. She loves to sing and act and uh, dance. It's so fun to watch her express herself. And we wanted to support her in that. And the more that I looked at my kids, I know a lot of people will express, oh, my kids are like a carbon copy of myself. That's not fully my experience, um, because my kids are different from me. Uh,
Right. And from each
one
other.
of and from each other, absolutely. They are. Whew, sometimes our household is like a sensory fight because everybody is so different in what they are needing in in order to regulate. Um, so being able to look at what are these other people expressing about their needs and what their experiences have been, how does that correlate to what I'm seeing in my own children? And how does that reflect in myself, what I have experienced, and what I am experiencing currently. And then everything just kind of went, oh,
Like,
there's
wait a
everything clicking it. There's
minute.
everything clicking into place.
And so, did you pursue a formal diagnosis, or is this a self-diagnosis?
This is a self-diagnosis. I personally don't feel that I really need a formal diagnosis. I might change my mind on that in the future. Um, but it's it's not really something that I need a documentation on. I've already lived my life. I'm 33 now, and I've had epilepsy for like 25 years. So I've already done like the whole being disabled for your entire life, um, and grieving that this childhood difference that they told me I was going to grow out of never went away. I've already kind of processed that and I already live with that. So there's not really in my mind something that is going to validate that for me anymore or change my medical situation a whole lot more than what I already know about myself and how I run my life uh, anymore.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like maybe if you're a kid and extra time on tests or whatnot can be helpful, great.
Yeah,
But as a grown-ass adult, you're like, okay, I made it this far. Like, and I think there's
yeah,
something really interesting about autism in particular, right? There are no particular medicines. There's nothing really you can take, or there's nothing medically relevant you can take, as far as I'm aware. People are saying some interesting stuff, but that's a different conversation. Um,
yeah.
and so, like, a real diagnosis, you don't get access to anything you don't currently have access to, is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Yeah, there's not really anything. If I was, if I still worked in like a corporate job, which I don't any longer, um, then there are arguments, or if I was going to school, um, or anything like that, there would be, accommodations to put in place, to ask for. But it's not something that's completely relevant to me right now. Um, and there are a lot of barriers when you're looking at somebody who is low support needs, somebody who is a woman, somebody who has been high masking, who has been largely successful for most of their life. There's there's a lot there that makes it very hard to fully trust that I would find the right people. I know that they're out there. It's just kind of one of those things that I'm like, I'm okay right now, and I'm doing the things that I need to do for myself. And that's so much more important to me than a piece of paper that says,
Yeah.
yeah, you are.
Well done, you
Okay.
figured it out.
Yay.
Yeah, totally. No, I get that. Um, I'm in the same boat. I'm currently self-diagnosed, and I'm considering pursuing a diagnosis just actually for this podcast. I'm curious what the process is. I'm
Yeah.
curious to find a psychiatrist who is actually willing to do this journey in public with me. To actually,
Ooh.
right? That would be like, I want to record the interviews. I want to. I'm not saying I'm definitely putting it into the podcast, but I'm like, I'm curious about that. And so even just finding somebody who's willing to say yes to that. I've spoken to a bunch of people, and most people are like, oh, mostly don't do this in public. I was like, I hear you. And
Yeah.
I don't want to impress for you. But anyway, so
That
you
would be
mentioned,
really, really interesting just in
right?
it, in to share because I do feel like it's very scary in anything new, in anything that you're trying to approach. You're like, can you just explain the can you just explain the process in detail for me in even to consider going into that because that would be a really cool thing for you to do.
Yeah, fingers crossed. It costs a lot of money, and I don't have a lot of
Yes.
money, so I need to figure out that part too. But
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited about it. Um, you mentioned you used to be in corporate land. What kind of type of thing were you doing, and what are you doing now?
Yeah. So I always kind of describe it as a corporate job because I kind of feel like I was in an in-between. I was actually a store manager for Starbucks for 8 years. So kind of a weird food retail corporate weird blend for a very, very, very long time. Um,
I mean, I think we can
and
agree that Starbucks itself is a corporation. So,
oh
and
yeah,
retail is
oh yeah,
hard.
oh
I
yeah.
used to work retail. That was hard for me. What was that like for you? That sounds.
It was it was something that for me was very, very enjoyable for a long time. And coming from the inside, Starbucks is it's very funny to look back uh, now. Some of the reasons that I enjoyed it for a really long time were Starbucks is incredibly routine based. Everything has a routine. You make a latte like this, there's 4 steps. You go into work and you do these things, and there's a right way to do this thing, and there's a wrong way to do this thing. And everything is routine based, so it makes it very clear what you're going to do. Starbucks also has a very clear mission statement that I really, really agreed with. And for a long time, I really felt like they were following the mission statement, and I was so on board. I was so in it. I was like, we're here, we're doing the routine, we're doing the thing. We move very fast. I mean, I can make a latte so fast, and I believed in the mission statement so wholeheartedly. And when I really got my own store and I had a lot of people around me who did not see it the way that I saw it. And that really started to crumble everything. And at the time, I thought, I'm just going through like work burnout. People go through work burnout. That's what happens. And now I can look back and go, oh, this is autistic burnout, and probably the biggest experience of autistic burnout that I ever had. It was just overwhelming. And there were a bunch of other contributing factors in my own personal life at the time, but work was a huge one. And it just really blew up in my face. And luckily, I had a very supportive partner at the time who really, when I said, I have to quit, I have to resign, he said, yeah, please do. And so I did. And I took a lot of time to kind of figure out what is it that I'm going to do now. And I think I tried a little bit to kind of feel out like, what can I go back into an office style job? Can I go back to like being a manager in that I have so much experience doing this. I'm really good at it. Uh, but there's kind of a difference between like being good at something and being able to sustain something. Um, and it's for me, it's no longer sustainable. It's that burnout ruined it for me. I tried to go back to like a side retail job and could not. I stayed there for maybe a month, and then it all the trauma kicked back in, and I said, I can't do this. Can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and so I now work from home. I started off doing life coaching, um, and got a lot of training in uh, life coaching, hypnotherapy, um, uh, time techniques. I think there's a lot of interest for people in general, I think, also have this interest, but I think particularly there is a special interest of autistic people to understand people as a whole and particularly yourself by studying how does the brain work? How does so you end up looking at like neurolinguistic programming, you end up looking at astrology, you end up looking at uh, life, uh, all the life books, life things are such a big, uh, you could buy so many life books. I'm not saying that exactly the way that I want to, but
Right.
Brene Brown, Glennon Doyle, all of the people who are out there talking motivational books and things like that, and you're trying so hard to understand what it is um, that everybody else is going through and that you're going through. And it's not, it does make sense at first, but it's never quite going to hit exactly right because it's not your experience.
Yeah. I mean, that's why originally this podcast started, right? I'm writing one of those books aimed at neurotypical folks about how to understand us better. And I think, it's one of those things where at some point, if you can't find a book you desperately want to read, you got to write the damn thing yourself. you know?
Yeah,
I don't make the
yeah,
rules, but
absolutely. Um, so I did that for a really long time and started to kind of burn out on that as well. I don't know if you've ever come across this book. I can't think of the author off the top of my head, but there's a really great book called Toxic Positivity.
yeah, it's a
Yes.
really good read.
Oh my God, it's so good. And that really summed up a lot of how I was feeling in that a lot, very similar to my experience at Starbucks, in that a lot of my peers were talking about things that they did not understand, that they were not really encompassing the breadth of the work that people needed to do. They were more inclined to just, say, just be your authentic self. That's the,
Right.
that's it. And I was
Just
like,
terrible advice for a high masking autistic person. I'm like, I don't even know who that is.
yes, I was like, I used to try and explain to people that my my experience for so long was having a closet full of me's that I would wear, but I didn't like any of those people. And I would get such strange looks, and I didn't understand why. And now I can look back and understand, oh, it's because no other people are not masking that to that extent.
Yeah.
People have like, you know, airs that they put on when they go into different social situations, but not to that extent. And that's why when I was trying to communicate that to people, they did not know what I was talking about. They were
Totally.
so surprised.
And I expect that the Starbucks job is actually kind of great for that. You're wearing a literal uniform. And I think for me, like putting on an item of clothing where I'm like, hey, now I'm playing this new role. And the beautiful thing about it, you were trained to the nth degree in that role. When you wear this uniform, you speak like this, you do this. What a blessing. And my
Yes,
sense from your story actually is that where it fell apart from you was when you got promoted beyond where it's rigid, right? You get into a place where like, okay, now you're dealing with all the edge cases. It's always like, well, talk to the manager. This is above my pay grade, but suddenly that's your pay grade, right? So now you get to deal with all the stuff that you aren't trained for.
yes. And, this still really hits really, really hard for me. I know it's so easy to be frustrated with your middle manager. Middle managers are not trained well. They are not paid enough. They and there are bad managers out there, but I tried so hard to be good to my people and to be good to my customers, but they're not given the resources. The people you should be mad at are your CEOs who don't care. They don't give a shit about you. I had no power over how much money my employees made. I had no power over how many hours I was allowed to staff my store with. I had no power in it. And it was so
Totally.
soul crushing.
Yeah, and I think this is a really like it is kind of incredible to me how often in these conversations essentially we end up talking about stage 4 capitalism. It's like, look, the CEOs aren't bad people per se. What they're doing is they're doing what they're told to be done by the board, which is the fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. And ultimately, your coffee shop gets to be as bad as possible because that's as cheap as possible to still get away with keeping your customers. Really, that's what it boils down to. And so somebody who's in the middle trying to create a good work environment for their employees, that's great. But, the shareholders don't actually care, you know?
No.
Um, and I think it's interesting at all the different layers of life, the incentives are different. Right? In your house with your partner and your kids, the incentives are different from when you're slinging life advice or if you're slinging lattes. Like it's all the incentives are really, really different. I'm really intrigued by what drew you to life coaching. What was it that went, ooh, that's something I would love doing and be good at?
I really felt like it was very similar to everything that I have ever been drawn to in my life. I have a degree in theater. Um, I've always been a huge artist, just in general, primarily in writing. Um, I did uh, I've probably been writing poetry since I was like 7. And it's always to me this ability to connect to people in these very, very small ways, and how you can slightly change their lives. And ironically, partly why I enjoyed Starbucks is you can make somebody a latte and their day is better. I have so many stories of where people made my life better, and I know that I made their lives better, and people that I still remember for years and years later, that I still remember and love and cherish. And it's the same with shows that I have done, people that I have met along the way, and life coaching just felt like that in a different capacity, where how can I one-on-one take all of these things that I have acquired, all of this knowledge and all of these things that I know, and share it with people who are hurting or need this direction and want to grow and change where they are headed.
Yeah, I love that. It mirrors a bunch of my experience too. I do a lot of like workshops and group work and stuff where I'm on team helping facilitate these kind of spaces. And like even just this last weekend, I was at a workshop that was all about surrender and control. It's really about controlling the like what in life do you have control over and how do you feel about that?
Mhm.
What do you not have control over? How do you feel about that? And then how do you surrender to the things you don't have control over, right? And on the one hand, I spent a weekend loading trucks and carrying stuff around, right? Very kind of mundane crap. And at the same time, I was in a room where people had their lives changed. How often do you get to do that? Right? It's such a beautiful gift to give. And I'm seeing you light up. And like, I know you've been there, right? It's just
Yeah.
it is such an incredible thing to be doing. Yeah. So thank you for doing that. And I also heard a past tense there. So you're not doing that anymore. You got a little burnt out on that.
It's kind of been like a shift. So, I started to see like a lot of my peers who were not really cracking into the deeper the deeper levels. And I have such a passion and a love for art. When I really sat with it, I was trying to figure out there is some kind of connection here that is going to allow people to dig in deeper. Adult Drama and Other Essays by Natalie Beach. And she has an essay in there where she is talking about um, the coming of age and how she was doing some kind of movie or documentary, and she had kind of come past the age of like discovering yourself, but the people who were producing it still wanted that narrative of like we see on TV, like, oh, and then the lead figures out this thing about themselves and everything changes and da da da. And that was how I felt
Cue
where,
end of Act Two. Yeah,
yeah,
it's so
yes,
predictable.
all that. And I was like, I am so tired of constantly having to peel off this layer of bad things about myself to rediscover who I am. And I really just want to settle into the things that I like about myself. That's what I want to do. I want to stop looking at what do you want to release? What do you not like about yourself? What do you,
Right.
what are, I want to stop doing that. And I felt like when I was doing more creative work as opposed to stereotypical, more therapy based or and I never want to discount therapy. I think that's like a bad a bad track to take. But anything that you tend to get from like 3 journaling prompts, get more authentic, or you know, whatever the same, because they're always the same. They're always just slightly different flavored, and they're not really. I don't feel like they ever really crack anything deeper, and they're always so vague. And when you're somebody who's very detail oriented and you are asking a lot of questions and you need those clarifications and that picture painted for you, it's not really enough to go 3 things that you're releasing. Like that doesn't make any real sense. It was so hard for me for a long time to sit in uh in spaces where people were just like, well, my teen self would be so proud of me. And I was like, I don't think that she would. I don't see any reason that she would. Why would she be? I don't understand. That didn't make any logically, that didn't make any sense to me. And I could not understand. Like I couldn't reconcile that. It took so long for me to make that click. Um, because people are unwilling to walk those steps with you. They are
Yeah, totally.
unwilling. They're not willing to walk those steps with you. And if you are somebody who, like me, was a undiagnosed neurodivergent, highly did not want to be alive, was did not want to be here, very depressed, really struggling, why would I think, why would I be able to look back and go, yeah, it's so chill, should be so proud?
Go
Why?
go
Why would she
future
be?
me. Right.
Go, 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 go. Why would I be able to put a positive spin on that? That's so hard and so much pressure. So to be able to dive into the artistry, something that I'm so passionate about and enjoy so much, and just really write through one of the first things that I really delved into was this project called Ink Stained Souls, and it was all about the experience of being like an emo teen. So it was all about embracing that angsty side of your teen self and also like the cringiness. Yeah, it was pretty cringe to like be be that. Like I got made fun of a lot for having these obsessions with all these emo bands, and but it's also been one of the most healing things for me to just validate these very strong opinions that I have. And one of the things that I love most ab about myself and my life, and one of my special interests, and there are other people who have been able to enjoy that with me because they also love emo music and they love that time in their life where they were cringy and they were also sad and nobody listened to them, nobody heard them, nobody understood them. They were incredibly misunderstood. Everybody thought that they were just, oh, they're just being dramatic, but their sadness was incredibly real. And all of those things, being able to channel it, I think, in this artistic way is a outlet that is so different than if you're just sitting and asking yourself kind of these sterile questions. I have been to a lot of therapy sessions or a lot of even group sessions that were structured in this way where or even writing in my own journal where I was trying to come up with the correct answer. And that makes it so much harder to find anything valuable. Not that it has to be valuable, but see anything or enjoy anything. Um, because if you're always so focused on, well, what do people want me to say? What will look good in my journal? If somebody reads my journal, which they shouldn't be, um, what should I write here? And that makes it so hard to express yourself and what you are really trying to do in that context of finding the authentic self.
Right. And I feel like if you are writing your journal for an imaginary audience, then you're masking, right? You're masking
Yes,
yourself from yourself, which
yes,
sometimes that runs deep.
yes, it really, really does. And it's a process. It's a process. Um, it's it's very, very hard. Um, but I think that it's so enjoyable to kind of approach it in a different way, especially if you are creative or you do enjoy writing, to just kind of explore different avenues of expressing yourself rather than always feeling like you are writing for an imaginary audience. And especially if you are somebody who does engage in a lot of high masking tendencies, or like I myself am a content creator, so there was a lot of like, okay, well, this has to perform well, so all of those things were coming into collision with each other, like all of, and I did acting before that, so a lot of things that were coming into collision with each other that made it very hard to break that down.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what does the writing do for you now?
It really um turns off my brain. My brain is very busy. It's busy all the time. It thinks about um all the things that I have to get done, all of the it's taking in all of the sensory input, it's taking in just everything all the time. And I often make the comparison to um, when things are going on, when there's like like a problem happening. I make the comparison to a thing called number sense, which is a thing I used to compete in middle school, and it was a timed competition where you had to do math in your head and just write down the answer in pen, so you couldn't show any work. And that one, I was not cut out for that. I'm okay at math. I'm pretty good at math, but that's not my forte. And some people are really good at that. Some people that's like they can do all sorts of math in their head, and that's great. I think it's very hard to sit there and mull over and retreat into your head and try and work out all of the aspects of the nuances and complexities and stressors of whatever's happening in your life all in your head, especially if you are also taking in, oh my God, like right now it's raining. My cat is washing his paws. I can feel the blanket on my, all of these things that are also you're having to take in extra that are so much. Um, to then compound that by, well, I'm just going to work out everything in my head and I'm going to work it out by myself without um, any sort of processing, uh, makes it very, very hard. And so when I sit down and I say, I'm just going to like free write a poem without any kind of real structure or uh, anything, and I just kind of put out these feelings, or I'm just gonna, you know, put all of these weird sketches together in these absurdist patterns and put all these doodle words around and see what comes out. The things that will play out are like this peek inside of what's happening. And then I have so much more clarity in the ability to go, oh, okay, now I can see myself so much clearer than trying to see what's happening by like, I don't know, he- turning my eyeballs inside here. That's, I can't do that. There's probably people out there who can do that. I can't.
Well, I think what it sounds to me like you're describing is like a lot of autistic folks are external processors, but also struggle with like words, right?
Hmm.
And it sounds to me like you found a way of turning writing into a way to externally process what you're trying to do without having to do it with somebody else. Does that sound right?
Yes, and I definitely do both. Like, I'll sometimes process, and a lot of times I do this less with personal stuff and more so just to regulate through talking. Um, with my partner or my mom, where I'll just say, like, my partner will get home from work and we'll sit on our porch and I'll say, I saw a funny video today. I'm going to summarize it for you. Or my partner doesn't like to read, but I love to read. So I know I'm not going to spoil anything for him because he's never going to read the book. So I'll say, I read a book and this is what happens in the book. And then I'll just tell him the summary of the book. And that helps regulate my nervous system, but keeps anything that I don't really want to necessarily process unless there is something that I want to say, this crazy thing happened to me today. What do you think? Then I know that I have that space because all the time I'm building out that space of just saying, these are the things, and this is my voice, and I'm practicing using it. But I also think it is so important to build out those spaces that are for ourselves, because there are things that we don't want to share and we don't want feedback from anybody else because we just want to work it out for us. And I don't want anybody to tell me what to do, because if they tell me, I I'm
Right.
not gonna do that.
Totally. I've had that with my therapist a number of times where took a deep breath. I was like, I want to tell you about this thing, but it's going to take us 3 sessions just to give you enough context for why this would make any sense. And she's like, well, stay with the emotion. Well, the emotion is angry. Like, well, we can work with that. She's like, yeah, but I don't need you to work with the anger. I'm good at working with the anger. I need to talk this through with someone, but I don't want to spend $900 just catching you up so we can start the work, right? And sometimes that's worth it if it's a big childhood thing that you need to work out. But it's like, this is annoying me enough that I want to work it out, but this is not the right way. And I think for me, this is actually the reason I reached out to you in the first place. You do a lot of really good content about how to use writing to. I'll let you explain how you use it. But the way it spoke to me was that I find it incredibly hard to journal because I feel
Mhm,
like I am fluent trilingual and I don't think I really think in a language. And I feel like
mm,
writing anything down cheapens it. It's like
mm,
it gets simplified enough to fit into words, which
mhm,
is great. And now you can address it at the level of words. But
mhm,
often the challenge I'm facing or the complexity of what I'm facing is kind of more complicated than the words. Like if I write it down, suddenly I've kind of sullied the thing I'm struggling with. And it's great to get a solution on one level, but then I know I've left something on the table. And so
mhm.
one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is A, I would love to learn more about how you work with people and how they want to write, but also if that is a common experience for you and how you deal with that.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And that I I have a word for that. I I call it the thrash. And it's this internal battle of like, I know that if I like write this down and I like do this for myself, it will feel better and there will be some sort of benefit from it. But I can't let it go enough, because if I put it down, I don't know what's going to come out, and I'm concerned that it will not be satisfying enough, because words are so precious and so big and so profound and so important, and there's so much, and you want them to be so right. You want them to like fit in the puzzle, like the last puzzle piece sliding in that just makes everything fit. There's never going to be like a simple solution that encompasses everything. It's like, you know, you can read a million books about spirituality and none of them are going to encompass the whole of the complex spiritual experience. It's way too hard, and everybody's experience is so unique. But I think the exception to that is that it's so much more beneficial to try and put something down, even if it's just one word, to try and see what comes out and allow yourself that curiosity, because you might find, oh, well, that wasn't it. That wasn't how I wanted to say that. There are times I'm trying to write something, I go, oh man, that's not at all how I wanted to say that. I'm totally screwed up. That's not it. Where are those words? And I'm like super mad and angry at myself that wasn't at all what I was trying to say. And then on the flip side of that, I have absolutely done workshops where people are like, okay, I'm just gonna like dive in. I'm just gonna dive in. And then they'll read back what they wrote, and it's just like this huge breath of, I had no idea. I had no idea that that they were even in there. I didn't even know I was holding on to those. I had no idea. And I was so wowed by them. And
Yeah,
so
and then you kind of have to be brave enough to just go for it, right? And I think that's where
you
workshops are really
do.
helpful, right? It's like, well, this is the one time where I don't get to have an empty sheet, right? I do have to write something. And yeah, I think that's fantastically beautiful. And I
Yeah.
think the other piece of this is sometimes I read something somebody else has written and I'm like, how did that get into my head? This feels obscure, but somehow they were able to write down how I feel without feeling what I feel. So why can't I do that? Right? It gets like, come
Yes.
on, I know myself better than that.
Yeah, that's probably been a lifelong struggle of mine where I'm just like, can you just, can somebody just read this? And then, that's what I was trying to say. So I don't have to tell you because I'm tired.
Totally, yeah. And it's interesting too, because sometimes it's like the emotional recognition I get um, is perfect, and then the actual story that's being told is completely different. But I'm like, it's just, oh,
Mm,
it hits just right. Like you
yeah.
wrote an analogy for an emotion that I can totally recognize and have experienced, and that was not how I got there. But I think
Hmm.
that's part of the beauty of art, right? Like you
Hmm.
mentioned emo songs earlier. Yeah. Like I can't play a guitar to save my life, but occasionally I'm a little bit older to you. For me, mostly it was heavy metal, but it's like, yeah, I hear you, bud. Screaming into a microphone sounds about right now, you know?
The amount of times my partner is a big metalhead, so we kind of overlap, and all the time I'm like, "Oh, you don't know this song? We're just gonna sit and we're gonna sit with the lyrics going by, and I'm gonna, isn't that a good one? Is it that good? Don't you get it?"
Yeah, totally. So, if we have a listener who's like, okay, this sounds actually kind of awesome, um, would you give us some homework? Something to try before we all sign up for your writing classes?
Um, let's see some homework. I would say, depending on what it is that you are wanting to get out of it, um, and I have a lot of different detailed questions, different detailed prompts for free on my blog that are a little bit more dialed in, um, because it really helps to be more specific. Um, but if you're looking for just a place to start, I I like to start with the Ernest Hemingway quote, one all you need is one true sentence. And if one sentence feels like too much, you can even just start with one word, um, because it's just that initial pen to paper movement to get going.
Yeah, I recognize that so well. I was a journalist for a long time, writing like a bunch of stories per day, right? And not everything I write is beautiful poetry, but just the act of constantly having one or two documents open, constantly typing on my keyboard, means that context switching into doing like more processing typewriting is so easy. Like fingers are warm, the pipes are open, And when I'm
Mhm.
doing that, when I'm not working as a journalist, i.e., now, I find it really helpful to just actually put on a song and as quickly as I can transcribe the song, like just write down the words I
Mm.
hear. And I am a very fast typist with many songs I can't follow along, but that tiny little edge of frustration that I can't keep up. And then it's like, okay, now I'm warm, now I'm annoyed. Great. Apple A, delete everything, go. And it's just such a weird, like, it's just a priming the pump thing. But once it's flowing, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love the feeling of pen to paper. And so even if it's, you know, like we were talking about, um, those song lyrics that stick in your head or lines from poems, lines from shows, things things like that that just are stuck and you just write them over and over again to get that rhythm. It's can be really, really soothing.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, right, it stills the brain, it quiets the brain. Because once you're in a process of writing, you're creating. And creating, like I don't know about you, but I can't multitask when creating. Like even when I'm doing something with my hands, like I love podcasts. If I'm like building something with wood or woodworking, I can't listen to something. I'm creating. It's like it's that doesn't work. Music, sure, but actually having to take in any information, no, not at all.
I like to, I'll do like audiobooks if I'm cleaning, but if I'm trying to like actually absorb information, no.
Right. Well, and I feel, I mean, it might be different for you, but to me, cleaning is not a creative pursuit. It's a right.
Not particularly.
It's unpleasant, and podcasts kind of make it bearable. Yeah. That's beautiful, and I feel a little bad about putting you on the spot, asking you to do exactly what you said doesn't work. I.e., come up with one prompt that is that was mean. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think it, you know, it's a good example. Like the more the more honed in you are to what works for you and what is working for you, the more specific questions you can ask, like, what is it that I'm trying to ask? Um, like I did some questions around inner child healing, and a lot of people will just ask, like, what makes your 5-year-old self happy? That's a good question, but also is kind of wide, and it's it's a lot to take in and kind of overwhelming. And so if you can, the more you can narrow that down to something really specific so that you can actually use it for something and it's more tangible and actionable, it will make it, um, you know, something that is less like a weight on your shoulders and more like something enjoyable.
Yeah, and at that point, it becomes generative, right? It becomes this thing. And you mentioned earlier, it doesn't have to be valuable, and I agree with that. But to me, even just a sense of feeling at peace is valuable, right? It's like
Yeah.
even if the writing is garbage, if my brain was quiet for an hour, great. That was like worth every 3 cents I spent in ink writing
Yeah.
this down.
When I say like it doesn't have to be valuable, I always mean like it can be terrible writing. It's not publishable, it's not content, it's not something you ever have to show anybody. It's not it doesn't have to result in action steps. It doesn't have to, it can go in a closet. It can be full of spelling mistakes. It doesn't, it doesn't really matter. It's the only thing that matters is what did you think of it? Did you
Right.
enjoy it? Did, when you look at it, do you go, I liked that?
And even in that statement, I would like to invite you to think about that it does matter.
It does. There's a fine line.
I hear you. That's beautiful. I'm very inspired to go and do some writing. So shall we wrap up this interview? I love this conversation, but I want to go write. I think that's the best compliment I can give you. I have a couple of questions that I typically end with for people, and one of them is, what do you wish allistic folks knew about neurospicy folks?
No, I think in interacting with people, I my biggest wish is that holistic people understood how different everybody is. Like I'm like I mentioned, you know, I have my two daughters. Um, my 7-year-old is non-speaking, so people are pretty aware when they encounter her that something's different. Um, most people that we encounter are incredibly uh, kind. They don't really expect her to do anything. So there, some some people are not very kind, but most people that we encounter are incredibly kind to her. Um, my 5-year-old kind of teeters where people she seems to be a little bit more, for lack of a better word, normal. So some people are kind of like, what is she doing? Why is she like that? Um, and then I myself, if I don't disclose, people will never see it. There's no reason that they would. It's incredibly easy for me to, well, easy. It's not, but it, to fly under the radar would be very simple because it's just not something that people are looking for. And I think being able to understand that there are so many different ways that people show up in the world, um, all valid, all different, all able to contribute in different ways. Um,
Yeah, I sometimes get that when I'm like in a post office or whatever, and somebody does something dumb or weird, and I get really annoyed with them. And then later on, I realize, oh, there's something up with them. And then I catch myself. I'm like, why am I so unkind? Why is it only okay for the other person to be weird if there's something quote unquote wrong with them?
mm,
And that's where I'm like, oh God, Haye, you've got a lot of work to do because clearly there's this snap judgment that is unkind and I don't know. And so why haven't I settled into this pattern of acceptance? Like, oh yeah, they're a little
mhm.
strange, or yeah, they cut the line, but I'm sure they have a good reason, or whatever. And instead I'm like, oh, they're a terrible person, or whatever, right? I'm like, oh, that's not necessarily the right conclusion there, bud. Um, yeah, it's really fascinating.
It can be really hard because, it's also things that we ourselves are learning as as adults who grew up in an ableist society. So we have to learn it ourselves. It's an entire new uh, language that I, as a parent, have had to acquire and understand and change as people go, no, 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 not that one, and uh, I constantly go, I'm not sure if that was quite right, and I'm trying to, it all the time, and you know, we're always learning and getting better, and I just hope that other people in the world who are not necessarily encountered and presented with it every day on a personal level can extend that kindness out into the world.
Yeah, totally. Um, can you think of a time when you were seen and loved in exactly the right way for you?
I will give this example. When my partner and I first started dating, I had just graduated from college and I was working for a nonprofit theater. And we were out at a bar and I was just word vomiting, just the mass verbal dump of why theater was important, why the arts mattered, how this tangent probably went on for so long. And the whole time, I don't even know how long. I don't even know if we were like official boyfriend, girlfriend, or if we had just been on I don't know how early on into the relationship this was. But he was just sitting there, just doe-eyed, completely locked in, listening to me like he had never heard anything so important in the world. It mattered so much to him. And there were so many moments like that sprinkled early on. And it's still to this day, when he just locks in on me to really listen and care. And I know, and I'll constantly say, I'm so sorry. I know that you don't care. I know that you don't care. Thank you so much for listening. And he's like, it's fine. It's,
Right. But that's a beautiful way, right? Like, he may not care about what you're saying in that moment, but he cares about you.
yes,
That
yes.
sounds
And
like
I
love
know,
to me. What a beautiful way to be loved.
yes. And I know so many people, so many autistic people are so afraid that if they share their special interests or verbal dump or regulate in that way, that people will not respond positively to them. And I really feel like by choosing to express myself incredibly early on, way before I was even considering any form of autism, just because I was highly passionate about theater and I wanted to talk about it, that it really solidified part of how we operate as a couple, that and that it's incredibly enjoyable that we get to share this. So
I
I would
love that.
really encourage people that you find people in your life who listen to you that way.
Thank you. That's usually my final question, but I also notice you have some words tattooed on you. And as somebody who really cares about words, would you tell me what those words are?
Yeah, I have La Belle Dame Sans Merci, which is a John Keats poem, The Beautiful Woman Without Mercy. That was a poem we read in high school that locked into my brain and I could never forget it. So I told this story for a while that after writing it over and over and over again, I finally got it tattooed on me and then I never had to write it again because it just,
That is beautiful.
I also have love, which is uh, a reference to write love on her arms. Um, and so I got that after a friend in high school took his life after we graduated. So that was a big shift for me in realizing that if I took my life, it would make a big impact. Um,
Yeah.
I have some other ones that aren't super visible, but this is also my wedding ring right here. Um, our last name is King, so my husband and I have crowns instead of wedding rings.
Thank you for sharing. It's such a strange thing, right? Because when you have tattoos, I always get the sense that people feel like they have a right to access to you in a way, to ask you about tattoos and things like that, which I'm not always comfortable with. But at the same time, I had something carved into my body. Clearly it meant something at some point, right? It's it's a thing.
I almost never get asked about them, funnily enough.
Interesting.
And I don't know if it's just that I'm not out in public very much anymore. I used to get asked about my hand tattoo a lot, probably because men were like, "Are you married?" Uh,
Right.
but
Yes, and as permanently as this is.
yeah, and they used to be like, "Well, that's gonna suck if you get divorced," and I was like, "Okay, that
I didn't plan for that, so
I
great.
wasn't planning to, but thank you for your concern."
Right. It is
But
such a
I
weird thing.
it was really weird. But I just generally people don't I really don't get asked about them anymore.
Dylan, thank you so much for spending some time with me and for sharing so beautifully and openly. And thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. You can find us on TikTok on Autistic FM, on Instagram at autistic_FM, or on the web on autistic.fm. On our website, you can also find a link to our newsletter, which I send out whenever we do a new episode, with some additional resources and news from across the world of neurospiciness. The podcast is produced and hosted by me, Haje. If you know somebody who'd be a great guest for the podcast, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can email us on hello@autistic.fm or reach us on the socials. See you very soon.